let's rank every single tier 5 tower in Bloons DD6. Let's finally make this tier list, which I know it might be a little bit controversial, but again, this is all just a personal opinion, and it's gonna be based on a couple of things actually. It's gonna be based on how much I personally use the tower, how good I think the tower is on chimps mode, in boss events, and essentially just gameplay in BT6 in general. And then at the end, we do have some Paragons, so we might even rank the Paragons, but let's just deal with the tier 5 towers first, and then we're gonna see what happens. So let's just get this thing going. I organized all of these towers, by the way, in groups of 3, so it's gonna be all 3 paths for a tower. So I'm gonna timestamp this video, so if you guys want to see my opinion on a specific tower, you can just skip to that. It's gonna get timestamped. Also, all of these tier 5 towers are going to get ranked specifically as a standalone tier 5, so that means we're not gonna be taking into account any of the previous ones, which might make, you know, this tier list a little bit different than the ones you guys have been probably seeing online. Okay, so let's start with the Alchemist. Let's start with the Perma, and the Perma is actually not gonna get ranked too high, just because how often do you guys find yourself buying a Perma? And that's probably not that often, because we probably stop at the strongest stimulant, maybe even the Berserker brew. So the Perma is actually bought kind of, you know, not as much as you would think. So I'm just gonna put this thing into B category, just because, you know, you usually buy it in the runs in which you farm a lot and you have a lot of towers doing DPS and just these ultra late game runs, right? And I think the BMA falls into kind of the same category, but I would say the BMA is a little bit weaker than the Perma brew for sure. So I'm just gonna put it into C tier. The BMA is kind of a it's an interesting tower because it loses your money on chimp mode, but you can still buy it and you want to be strategic about it. So the previous tiers on the BMA, actually the lead to gold and the rubber to gold, are actually really nice, but we're not, you know, ranking this based on those towers. It's just the BMA is a standalone tower. So I feel like unless you're going for an ultra late game run, you know what, I'm just gonna put this thing into D tier, honestly. And then lastly, a total transformation, an amazing tower, some amazing synergies, but this thing needs to be a part of a specific strategy. You can't just drop it and just use the ability. And I think that the BMA is a little bit more useful than the total transformation. It's an ability, it requires some synergy, and I'm gonna put it in F tier just because I don't personally use this tower a lot. I don't think that the tower is necessarily bad. It's just more of a personal preference that you guys see this in F tier. Okay, next up, the Boomerang. So the Glaive Lord is gonna go pretty high, I think, especially since the latest buffs. This thing now can have its glaives bounce on the same target with a cooldown of 0.6 seconds, and they recently also enabled all these glaives to travel all around the map. So it's a really nice change, especially for these, you know, ultra hard expert maps. But at the same time, I think people do actually use it, and I can kind of see myself. I used to use this tower not that much in recent times, but I can appreciate how good it is, and I think it's become a lot better in recent times. So I'm gonna put this thing in A tier. The permacharge, not my cup of tea, and I can see this thing being useful in some boss events, like maybe versus like a tier 1 boss or something like that. But other than that, I'm not a fan of this tower in general, but I can kind of see its strength. So maybe this is like a perfect C, just kind of a meh type of tower. So I'm just gonna leave it in C tier. And then finally, the Moab Domination. Oh my god, where do I place this thing? I feel like this is gonna go in BMA category because I just don't know what to do with this thing. So I think you get the most value from the bottom crosspath boomerangs from the Moab Press, not from the Moab Domination. So I don't find myself buying this tower that often, and I feel like for the money that you spend on this thing, you can buy so many other things. So I'm just gonna leave this thing in D tier. Next up are the Tacks, and I see the Tack zone. This is gonna be the easiest S tier probably of this entire tier list, maybe along with the Carpet of Spikes. Actually, that's gonna be an easy S tier as well. But talking about the Tacks, you know, this is the Tack zone is probably, you know, one of those towers that everybody loves, and then it's also so good versus bosses. It's good versus tier 1 bosses. It's a super cheap one. It destroys everything when you buff it properly. You know, this is just such a fun tower to play with. It has a limit, and as it's only useful in one-track maps, but that's completely fine because that's like what, like 80% of all the maps in BT6. So yeah, the Super Maelstrom is definitely gonna go below the Tack, but how much below is it gonna go? I think maybe it's gonna go into probably B tier, just because I don't see this thing being useful except like as a cleanup, or if you want to use it as the main DPS, then you're gonna need to build your strategy around that, and I just don't see people doing that, you know, that thing that often. So I'm just gonna place this thing in B tier just because it's a fun tower, and I've done a lot of videos with this thing actually, and I enjoy using it, but I think B tier is appropriate for this one. And then finally, the Inferno Ring. I don't exactly think the Inferno Ring is in a good spot. Can I say that? I really am not using this tower. I don't like this tower that much. This is like I look at this tower as just like a ceramic or just like a small balloon destroyer with a little bit of extra Moab class damage, and I feel like you can do that for a lot cheaper by buying something like the Bloons Solver, I guess. So yeah, I'm just gonna put this thing into D tier. Next up, the Dartlings. Okay, so the Bez is probably gonna go A tier for me. This is just one of those towers that I absolutely love. I think the build-up is really nice for this thing, but you know, as an isolated tier 5, again, as an isolated tier 5 tower, this thing is amazing. It does so much damage, stalls the balloons, just responds so well with buffs, and I just really enjoy using this thing, and I think you guys do. I think the community actually holds the Bez in a very high regard. Now I'm gonna place the Ray of Doom a little bit below the Bez once you buy this thing. So the problem that I have with the Ray of Doom is that it's a little bit too expensive. Now for the money, it does a decent amount of damage, damage, you know, just when the ray starts shooting, everything just gets destroyed. But I think it's a little bit too expensive, and when you think about the build up to this thing, you know, the plasma accelerator into the Ray of Doom, there's a little bit of an issue because the plasma accelerator doesn't exactly scale that well into a free play mode, so you're gonna actually have to manually follow those ceramics coming out. So if you're using the plasma accelerator as the main DPS to get to the Ray of Doom, that's probably not gonna be really fun to do. And the mat is probably gonna be like the easiest S tier, followed by the Tack. I mean, come on guys, everyone loves the mat. This thing just destroys small class Bloons. You use it in every single boss event there is. I bet you guys use it. I use it as well, and I think this is just a part of every late game run. It's a really nice tower. The save up is not exactly, you know, that nice, but for the money and for what it does, this is just like a prime tower in BT6. Next up we have the darts, and the darts might be a little bit controversial because I'm gonna place the crossbow master in like D tier. Now actually I'm gonna place it in C tier. Okay, so I think the crossbow master is not a bad tower, but it's not a good one either. It's like these mediocre types of towers which you probably deal with hard mode or something like that, and once replay starts rolling in, it's probably gonna need a lot of help. And it's like when the 90s start rolling in, it really doesn't do anything that much, but you can probably make it work if you wanted to. But I've always looked at this tower as like a main tower. I don't think that Ninja Q has done anything about it, so I'm just gonna leave it in C tier because I don't exactly use it that much. Next up, PMFC. PMFC is going in D tier. This is going to go just a single tier above total transformation, even though the way these guys work is about the same. But I'm gonna put this thing in D tier, and I've heard this somewhere, and that is that if you max buff, like you use all the abilities, you know, you brew it up, you give it all the buffs and everything like that to an army of PMFC dart monkeys, and those guys are gonna be stronger than a dart Paragon degree 100. I'm not sure if that's correct. I've not found any use for this tower in boss events, and honestly, if I'm not forced to use this tower by a challenge or like just by tower limitations, I'm not gonna buy it myself. So I think D tier is fine for this one. And then finally, the Ultra Jug. The Ultra Jug is gonna go a little bit. So is it B or C tier? Because I'm kind of looking at the towers in B tier, and am I putting this in the same category as the Perma Brew? Probably not. It's probably gonna go next to the Crossbow Master, and it's not like a bad tower, but if you want to fully use it, it needs a very specific map, right? So the balls can jump out. Yeah, but I also feel like the Bloons Solver, for example, again can do a much better job at dealing with ceramics than this thing, and the prices are not that different. So I think C tier is fine for the Ultra Jug. Druids. Okay, so I know where this thing is going. This thing is going in S tier. That's, you know, one of those towers is good in everything. Like, use this in boss events, use this in chimps runs, you can use it in ultra late game runs just because of how it works with all the buffs and all the other druids. But then looking at the Superstorm, I'm probably gonna place the Superstorm in the category of these guys at D tier, and I'm doing this because I don't think that this is a bad tower. It just stalls around for so long and it doesn't do any damage, and it just pushes the Bloons out of the range of our other towers, and it's just so annoying dealing with Bloons. Just popping Bloons when you have this thing. Looking at the D tier lineup, I'm not buying this tower unless I have to, and it's honestly really annoying having this on my team. So yeah, I'm just gonna put this in D tier, and then Spirit of the Forest is gonna go a little bit up. I think it's gonna go into C tier. This is again just one of those meh type of towers with the Crossbow Master, which I don't know what to do with this thing. Like, I know what it does. You can't exactly farm with it, you can't exactly restore lives with it, and it just covers the track with these vines. It's really nice, I guess, you know, at a certain point in the game, but all in all, I can spend the $35 or the $40,000 that this thing costs much better. The Big Trap, not a fan of this tower. It's a good tower for what it does, one-shotting the Bloons, and it doesn't care about how much HP, for example, a ZOMG has is just gonna eat it up. So but again, this is like a part of a specific strategy. It's probably above the BMA, but I think C tier is probably as much as this tower is ever going to go, so I'm just gonna leave this thing in C tier. And then looking at the Ultra Boost, the Ultra Boost is probably going to go in B tier, and I'm putting it in B because it's gonna go in the same category as the Perma Boost. So how often do you find yourself buying an Ultra Boost in a normal game? The answer is probably not that much. I mean, you stop at the overclock and that's about it. You only buy the Ultra Boost if you're going ultra late game. Finally, Essential Champion is gonna go in B tier. I would have, you know, previously maybe put this tower in C tier, but I guess it gets a little bit of a bump because recently got a 50% damage increase. So small sentries are actually really nice, really strong nowadays, and I just want to, you know, I think I want to use this tower a little bit more myself, but I can appreciate the buffs that's been happening, you know, with this tower recently, so that's why it gives it a bump. It goes in B tier for a small bump, I guess. Okay, now this is an interesting tower, the Super Glue, because if I were to rate these guys, including the tiers 3 to 5, I would have put this thing in S tier, but because it's only the tier 5, this is like an easy F tier. I think that's the highest contrast that you're going to see among any of these towers. That's because the Super Glue just doesn't do anything specifically useful. I mean, maybe, you know, late game runs in which you just stun and hold the Bloons in place, but I can do that with the Bloon Crush. So I think it's always had, you know, this kind of position in which people are not exactly using it, and they always stop at the 3rd or the 4th tier, and it's, unless they do something, it's probably going to stay like that for a long time. Okay, Bloon Solver, absolute maniac versus versus small balloons, and actually not even versus small balloons, but with these puddles that it leaves on the screen, they do a decent amount of damage, so maybe it can pop some of the mob class balloons as well. I'm gonna put this thing in B tier. I don't think it goes higher than B tier. I'm just gonna leave this thing in B tier. I think it's fine. I think the balloon solver is held in a decently high regard by the community, and I like this time. I'm not exactly using it that much. You're probably not seeing it in the videos that much, but I like what it does, and I think I'm gonna keep it in B tier. And then the glue storm is gonna go into S tier. This is because the glue storm is one of the best damage amplifiers in BT6, and this is a part of every single boss run, every single late game run. It just does so much. I think this is probably just because of that aspect. Like, I'm not using this tower to slow down the blues to do anything like that. I'm just using it to get some debuffs onto them, and I think this is the perfect tower for it. Okay, next up, the Comanche Commander. Now, these three and the Helis in general are going to be very interesting, because if I were making this tier list like, I don't know, like 2 years ago, I would have had the Apache Prime higher than the Comanche Commander, but nowadays it's going to be the other way around. So I'm going to put the Comanche Commander in B tier. This tower has been getting a lot of buffs, but also kind of, you know, some nerfs recently because they over buffed it, but I think it's still really nice. We recently did a video on this one. It does really well versus ceramics now, it seems like, and also can hold balloons. The save up is really nice, and I think that the Comanche Commander is in a nice spot. And then the Apache Prime is below the Comanche Commander for sure. I used to use this tower and I used to like this tower, but just because, you know, if you just take these two into account, and if you have some debuffs, for example, the Comanche Commander is way better with debuffs than the Apache Prime. Also, the price point for the Comanche Commander is a little bit better than the Apache Prime, and just in general what it does. So I feel like Apache Prime is definitely C tier. And then lastly, special operations. I'm just gonna put this thing into F tier, and again, because we're only, you know, judging this and ranking this by the 5th tiers, if this were, you know, including the downdraft and maybe even the support Chinook, I would have had this tower a lot higher, but just because it's the Marine and the special operations, I'm just gonna keep this thing in F tier. I don't use this thing a lot. Okay, now next up, the Ice Towers, and I'm gonna start with the Icicle Impale. This thing is gonna go in B tier. Now, for me, the Icicle Impale is the perfect stalling tower, and it's also a lot better, in my opinion, than the Bloon Crush and the Super Glue, because it's at a better price point in comparison to the Bloon Crush, but it does essentially the same thing, and in comparison to a Super Glue, it's just much better than it. So I think you get the best out of both worlds, and I really like the Icicle Impale. It's also part of every ultra late game run. Then the Absolute Zero is probably going to go in probably C tier. I think the way that you use the Absolute Zero is either going to be a platform, or use it in these 2 Mega Pop chips runs, in which you just use the ability in combination with the Permafrost, and you just slow the incoming balloons because it works in wild class balloons, and the slow is actually 20%, which gets applied to them as well. And then the Super Brittle, obviously S tier tower, is just, you know, all the tiers are nice, you know, leading up to a Super Brittle, but this thing is just one of the OG damage amplifiers, and it's just gonna go in S tier. Alright, next up, the Aces. So where do you place ISAP? I think probably like C tier is gonna be fine for this tower, just because it's way too expensive, like the Flying Fortress. The save up is nice with the Spectre, I guess, but it's still way too expensive for the Flying Fortress. And then where do you use this thing? So I can see myself using this thing in, you know, like a boss event where I'm gonna buy the Flying Fortress so that it starts, you know, collecting some pops, I guess. And then where else do you use this tower? I mean, once you buy it in a Chimps run, it's, you know, the run is over pretty much, but, you know, getting to it is a little bit annoying. So I don't think that people usually buy this thing that often. I feel like C tier is, you know, looking at the entire C tier lineup, I think this is just like a fine place for it. The Sar Bomba is gonna go in D tier. I feel like this tower is so situational. Like, unless I find it into a challenge or something like that, I'm not gonna find myself buying the Sar Bomba by any means necessary. Although the stun is really nice, because if it cannot pop a balloon instantly, it's gonna stun it. So the stun is really nice, but I don't think that I'm just gonna be buying a Sar Bomba. Like, what's the cost of this thing? Like $30,000-$40,000? Like, I think it's $30-something thousand. Yeah, I'm not spending that much money to stun a balloon or something like that. So yeah, this is gonna go D tier. And then the Sky Shredder is gonna go in B tier. I feel like the Sky Shredder is at a better price point than both of the other ones for what it does, and it also responds really well to buffs. It does require a little bit of micro if you're into that sort of things in order to get the most damage out of it, but you can honestly just leave it on Wing Monkey or something like that, and it's gonna be fine. I don't use this tower that much in boss events. It's not particularly good versus anything that the bosses throw at you, but as a DPS tower and as a game-winning tower, this is one of those perfect ones. So I think B tier is fine. Alright, now we have the Buccaneers incoming, and all of these 3 towers are going to be ranked pretty high, because I don't think there's currently a single bad Buccaneer crosspad. So the Carrier Flagship recently got a lot of buffs. This thing does a lot of damage, especially combined with the Miller crosspad with the Grapes. So I'm just gonna have this thing in probably B tier, but I'm just putting it in B tier because I know that the other ones are gonna get ranked, you know, pretty much high as well. So Parlord is gonna go probably in B tier as well, and I would rank these two the same, I think, actually. You know, a couple of updates ago, maybe the Parlord would have been above the Carrier Flagship, but not now. I think now that they're about the same, because the Parlord did get some nerfs. It's still a really nice tower and can probably, you know, get you this all-for-one and one-for-one achievement by itself, but the Trade Empire is gonna go in A tier just because it's one of those OG farming towers. You know, it makes a lot of money with the merchant menu. It's one of the best farming strategies in BT6, and I think this one deserves A tier for sure. Alright, now onto the subs. I'm gonna start with the Energizer. This is gonna be an easy D tier. I'm not even thinking about this one. It's definitely better than these guys on the F tier, but then again, I could not bring myself to put it in the same category as like the Flying Fortress or something like that, just because of how limited this thing is and what it does. So I don't see myself using this in Chimps mode. I don't see myself using this in any boss events, and I feel like this is a very situational tower which people mainly use for cooldown reduction, and that's about it. I mean, I don't think anyone uses for the extra hero XP. And then the preemptive strike is just such an I'm just gonna put this thing in F tier. Like, this is like a glorified first strike to me, and I feel like, you know, I know they do one shots and he launches these Moab assassin, you know, missiles to every balloon that spawns, but this thing like isn't even good up until round 100, because in round 99, for example, you have 45 DDTs, and those missiles that it launches, they can't even one shot the 45 DDTs, which is really sad. So to me, this tower has always been like a glorified first strike, and I can just buy a first strike if I need to, you know, do a lot of damage in one single spot, and that's why I'm gonna place this thing in F tier. And then finally, the sub commander. I used to love this tower. I still love it, but not as much as before. This is a really nice tower which responds really well to buffs. The build-up is really nice. You know, the sub spam is one of the, I think, still one of the better strategies for Chimps mode. You can beat a lot of maps with it, so I would definitely put this thing in B tier. Oh, we have the farms incoming. I know exactly what I'm doing with each of these farms. Look at this thing. Banana Central, S tier, not even a question. Buffs all the farms very well, with responds very well to overclock, makes a lot of money. One of the best farms, if not the best farm, best tier 5 farm in BT6. Monkey Wall Street, I'm gonna put this thing in A tier. It's gonna go below the Banana Central for sure, but this is one of those towers that you want to have in your farming roster for sure. And then an aspect that I like with the Wall Street, this is more of a personal note that I have with this tower, is the fact that it absorbs all of the crates that are getting produced by the farms surrounding it, so it works like a banana farmer. And then lastly, the Monkeynomics D tier. This is just such a like situational tier 5. I mean, I know that the previous tiers make a lot of money, especially the IMF loan. I think that's still the best way to make money in BT6, by the way, but since we're only judging it with the tier 5s, I think this is just like such a situational tower for me that I'm probably just buying it just because, you know, I want to throw out the other tier 5s in boss events, and that's pretty much it. Like, if you're farming with these guys up top. You're not farming with the Monkeynomics. Okay, next up, the Mortars. Now, with the Mortars, I know exactly where each of these guys is going. First off, the biggest one, my favorite one out of all of 3. So this one is going to go in B tier, and I like the 502 crosspath a lot because it deals with small balloons and also does decent versus Moab class balloons. I think this is a really nice tower. I think it's a little bit, you know, on the more expensive side. It's, I think, closer to 40k on Chimps mode, but it's still a nice tower for the money. You know, it gets overclocked nicely. The save up is really nice for it. But then when it comes to Bloons generation, I would definitely rank this thing a little bit lower than the biggest one, just because, you know, this thing and the artillery battery itself these guys are just towers that you need to micro constantly, right? So I'm not against microing or anything like that. I feel like I'm not finding myself buying the Bloons generation. I'm just stopping at the shattering shells because it does its job. And then with the artillery battery, it's just, you know, if you're looking to have a game in which you're gonna micro more or something like that, then you're probably going for this thing. So it's definitely a really nice tower, but I would just put these guys in the same tier, which is C tier. So not, you know, these D guys at the bottom, but definitely not the biggest one, you know, tier yet. Okay, now I'm looking at these ninjas coming up, and I actually learned a very interesting stat about the Grandmaster Ninja recently. This thing has not gotten changed in 30 updates. In 30 updates, this is the exact same tower. So if you went in a coma in like 2020 and woke up in 2024, this thing is the exact same tower, which is just the craziest stat given how fast BT6 changes. And also, if you want to make full use of this tower, you need to surround it with a bunch of shinobis. And I feel like, you know, it's either you're doing the thing with the shinobis or you're just not buying this tower in general, because it's so limited to a single strategy. I'm gonna place this thing in C tier, and I'm probably gonna do the same thing with the Master Bomber. And if you guys actually want to go on Chimps mode on a pretty high round, you actually want to do the Master Bomber and Shinobi strategy, because it's gonna start throwing these charges really fast. So it's gonna be kind of a cheap-ish setup. It's gonna get you very far in Chimps run. So that's like a tip for you guys on a strategy if you want to try it out. And then the Grand Sable is probably going to go into B tier just because of how good this tower is and what it does. So all spawn balloon just spawn. Wait, what am I doing? Why is this even B? This is probably like A tier. What am I talking about? This is just like such a good tower. I'm not exactly buying it too much, but that's because I'm not going to ultra late game and I don't see the need for this tower. But definitely one of the best towers in BT6 just because it reduces the HP of all incoming balloons. This includes bad balloons as well. So it's like really one of these must-have towers in ultra late game. But in normal gameplay, you can just, you know, you can probably just go without this thing. You can buy the normal tower, which is the 4th tier, right? Oh, look at what we have incoming. We have the spikes. So we have the perma spike, the super mines, and the copper spikes. Okay, so let me just just start with the perma spike. They kind of switch the numbers around and stuff like that, and I don't know how bad this tower is. You're probably gonna need Striker Jones or something like that, you know, just to get the Pierce up on this tower. But I feel like B tower is gonna be, you know, if I were making this video like I don't know, like 2-3 years ago, this would have been like an easy S tier, but I would bring it down a little bit from its former glory, so it's gonna go in B tier. And I think this is just like a typical exit defender nowadays. Now, talking about the super mines, I actually am not, you know, a big fan of this tower. Not that it's a bad tower, it does a lot of damage, and I think I've used it in a boss event a couple of times. It does a lot of damage to bosses, by the way. Maybe it's gonna be a part of like an ultra late game round, something like that, but I don't see myself using this tower that often. I feel like I can spend, you know, the $100,000 I need to pay for this thing. I can buy so many things for that price, it's insane. So I'm just gonna probably put it in C tier actually. And then finally, the Carpet Spikes, one of the best towers currently in BT6 in my opinion. This is an easy S tier. This is one of those towers that once you buy it, the run is probably over. So it's gonna need a little bit of help. You know, you probably need to buy some support towers and stuff like that. But this tower got buffed so much that even after a few nerfs from Ninja Q, I think this still is an S tier tower. Alright, so only a handful of towers left. We have the True Sun. So we're the Super Monkeys, and we have the True Sun God now. And so what do we do about the True Sun God? So thinking about this tower, you know, the way that I would use this thing is I don't go for the True Sun God, I go for the Vengeful True Sun God. But then whenever I go for the Vengeful True Sun God, it's either a boss event or I'm going ultra late game. And so that tells me that this is a very situational tower in the first place. Now, is it strong? Yeah, it's probably one of the it's one of the strongest towers in BT6, hands down, especially when you fully buff it. And I think just because of that fact, this thing has to go like easily into A tier, right? Just because of how good it is for your other towers, of the buffs that it provides, and just how much damage it does by itself. I think the anti-balloon is gonna get a little bit of a bump just because its price got reduced. I know the Tech Terra's price got increased, but I think that you can afford this thing a little bit earlier in general nowadays. And just because of that, once you buy it, I think if you're playing on Chimps, for example, that Chimps game is gonna be over the second you buy this thing. Do you buy it in boss runs? Probably not. So maybe this is like a sacrifice for the VTSG, something like that. And then lastly, the Legend of the Night. I mean, I don't buy this tower. There's absolutely no need to buy this tower in BT6 unless you're doing a sacrifice for the VTSG. So you know what, this is probably like an F tier tower, and you're probably buying it just to sacrifice it for the VTSG, and that's it. Like, I don't think that you're buying this tower for DPS like ever. Alright, now we have the snipers, so I'm gonna have the Cripple Moab in S tier just because all of these damage amplifiers are in S tier, and I really hold these towers in very high regard. So that's gonna be the Cripple Moab, just like an easy S tier right there. The Elite Sniper is gonna go in A tier. This tower is just a tower that I love. I absolutely love, you know, the Millipede Sniper strategy, the bouncing bullets, and the bouncing bullets spam with the Elite Sniper. It's like a really nice Chimps tower. It's a really nice cleanup, but you don't exactly use it in boss events or any other circumstances. But I think that this is like a tower that people love in general. And then the Elite Defender is probably gonna go in D tier. I don't use this tower at all. I feel like the 0-2-5 crosspath is it does clean up, but if I want cleanup, I'm just gonna go for the Miller crosspath anyway, so I'm gonna clean up in some other way. And then when it comes to the top crosspath, yeah, it does nicely versus Moab class Bloons, but then again, next up we have the villages. Okay, so Monkeyopolis, actually this is just gonna be, I'm just gonna say this as the Minneapolis and not the Monkeyopolis, because the Monkeyopolis is kind of meh, you know, it's fine, but the Minneapolis is one of the best farming methods in BT6, so I'm just gonna have this thing in A tier. It has been getting nerfed in the past few updates, but it's still one of the, you know, I think it's one of those necessary things in your farming strategy. The Homeland Defense is an easy S tier just because once you use this thing, I mean, imagine, you know, whatever thing you're doing Chimps, you're doing a boss event, you're going ultra late game, this tower is a must-have. It just makes your towers go crazy. So I don't even think I have to explain this thing. It's just like such a good tower with in the company of the Super Brill and all of these, you know, damage amplifiers. And then lastly, the Primary Expertise. You know, it's a meme, it's a funny tower, but D tier. Yeah, I don't think anyone uses this thing as the 5th tier itself. I think that people usually stop at the 3rd tier, so the Primary Training, and that's about it. I mean, you're not using this for the cooldown reduction on the primary towers. You're not using this unless you're using it on an advanced challenge, like a meme advanced challenge. I don't think anyone's buying the Primary Expertise as a DPS tower, so that's why I guess D. Alright, so only 3 towers left. So next up, we have the Wizard. Now, the Prince of Darkness used to be a tower which I would have put, you know, this is my 3rd time saying this probably in this video, but if I were making this tier list 2-3 years ago, the Prince of Darkness goes in S tier, but now it kind of does its job, but it did get nerfed in recent times, so I think that it still does the job, but it's like, it's kind of softened in comparison to where it used to be. So I'm just gonna have this thing probably a little bit hard. Don't want to have it a little bit harder than the crossbow. These guys, yeah, probably. Let's just have this thing in B tier just because it's still really good versus some of, the rounds in the 90s, like 95 for example. It also provides a really nice cleanup, but the Archmage is one of those meta type of towers which I have never just gotten used to. So if you buff it, it does well. If you leave it by itself, it kind of does, I guess it does okay, but it's not particularly good versus, I guess it's good versus mob class balloons, but then it leaves a lot of small balloons, so you can probably make it work, but I don't see myself using this tower unless I have to. So I'm just gonna have this thing in C tier, and then the Wizard Lord Phoenix is probably gonna be C tier as well. I know that this thing has gotten a lot of buffs, but the buffs have been mainly centered around the tier 3 and the tier 4, and since we're looking at this only as a tier 5, I think the C tier is just appropriate for the Wizard Lord Phoenix. Next up, Moab Assassin. What do we do about this tower? I don't see myself using a Moab Assassin that much. I can see myself using it in a boss event, just you click the ability and a skull of a boss is done. Cooldown is the fastest cooldown of any tower in BT6, it's 10 seconds, but I'm not personally using this tower a lot, but I can kind of appreciate what it does. So maybe like C tier along with the other guys, just looking at its company in C tier, I think this is going to be appropriate for myself. And then Bloon Crush is going to go into D tier just because it is in the same category of Superstorm. So these towers, they do the exact same thing. They just prolong the game for so much, and now they even added the pushback onto this tower. Can you believe this thing? Like, it's just knocking the balloons outside the range of our towers and just prolonging the round. It doesn't do any damage, so I can definitely see this thing getting used in an ultra late game run in which you just want to hold the balloons in place, but other than that, I don't think anyone's buying this thing. And then lastly, the Bomb Blitz. The Bomb Blitz actually goes kind of high in the list because Ninja Q, what they recently did is they removed the damage, they added attack speed, and now in the recent update they brought back the majority of the damage that they took away. So now the Bomb Blitz is actually a really good DPS tower. So I'm gonna put it in B tier. I did make a video on this, but I haven't played this thing too much yet, so I think B tier is gonna be fine for now. And lastly, the Beast Handler. This is a tower in which I have the least experience. I'm not playing the Beast Handler at all. This tower did not grow on me, so from my limited experience and just playtime with the Beast Handler, I think this is the Megalodon. So what do we give the Megalodon? Like, maybe we put it a little bit higher just because, I don't know, one shots bad balloons or something like that. So what do we give it? Like, maybe C tier. Just let's take a look at the C tier company and what it is. So probably like C tier for this guy. This is gonna be the Puakai. The Puakai is definitely a lot higher than the Megalodon. I know that the previous cross paths like the Condor and the Golden Eagle are actually really nice, but since we're not looking at those guys, I think the Puakai itself is just gonna be B tier. And then the Gigantosaurus, it's super expensive. I'm not, using this tower a lot, and I don't think that I would use it unless I had to. So I'm just gonna put this thing in D tier. And looking at its friends like in D tier, I think that it's gonna be appropriate. Now this tier list also has these Paragons included. It's not just tier 5 towers, so just quickly rank these guys as well. So Goliath is gonna be an easy S tier, the best Paragon in BT6, no questions asked. The Dart Paragon, I'm gonna put this thing in B tier. That might be a little surprising to you guys, but I'm just ranking based off how useful it is in an actual game, because I'm ranking these guys mostly based on boss events, and so the Dart Paragon is actually really useful for a very specific time in the game, and that's where we're trying to transform the farming to the next level, which is going to be the tier 3 boss. This is just like a super cheap Paragon which does really well versus almost all bosses for the price. The Ninja Paragon is just way too good. I'm going to put this thing in A tier, maybe not Goliath territory, but definitely A tier. The Wizard surprised me recently of how much damage the Metamorphosis ability does, but just like a standalone thingy. I'm not using the Wizard that often, so I'm going to put this thing in C tier. The NG is definitely one of the worst Paragons for me, so I'm going to put this thing in F tier, but I'm going to put this thing in F just because I want to put the Buccaneer into C tier. So let's have the Buccaneer like this. I think the Navrock is kind of nice. It doesn't do a lot of damage, but the aspect that it pulls all of these mob class balloons by itself and all these automatic hooks, I think that's a really nice one because it doesn't care about how much HP the balloons have. And then the Boomerang is going to go in B tier. It's a really nice, it's really cheap Paragon, and I really like, having this thing as a part of, starting from tiers 3 to 5 sometimes, if you get a good degree on it. It's just a really nice one. I especially like the homing projectiles, and I think it scales really well. And also notice that one of the Paragons that's missing is the Sub Paragon. So yeah, we don't have the Sub Paragon, but if we were to have this thing, I would probably put that into C tier. So yeah, that's gonna be it. That is the tier list for all the tier 5 towers. I might want to take a second look at this thing just to kind of maybe rearrange some things, but this is my first impression. So yeah, let me know what you guys think, and that's gonna be it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching the video, and I'm gonna see you on the next one.